found out my daughter got married the same way strangers did, by scrolling past a photograph I wasn't meant to see. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I had just finished folding laundry and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. The house was still, the kind of stillness that only comes when children are grown, and the rooms no longer echo with slammed doors or laughter. I sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight touching the edge of the old oak surface your grandfather built with his own hands, and I opened Facebook. I don't usually spend much time there. At my age, social media feels like peeking through windows that don't belong to you. But that day, something nudged me to scroll. And there she was, my Emily, standing in a white lace gown I had never seen. Her hair swept up in a soft twist, a bouquet of pale pink roses resting against her chest. She was smiling, not the forced kind of smile she used to give me when she was annoyed, but a radiant, glowing smile, the kind a bride wears. Next to her stood a young man in a gray suit. I had met him twice. And behind them, gathered close, were his parents, arms wrapped around her shoulders, faces proud, present. The caption read, "Mr. and Mrs. Parker, the best day of our lives." My hands started to shake so badly I had to set my teacup down before it spilled. No phone call, no invitation, no, "Mom, I have something to tell you." I wasn't even an afterthought. I clicked through the album slowly, as if moving too fast would make it hurt more. There were photos of the ceremony in what looked like a vineyard outside Sonoma, a small white arch draped in flowers, candles at sunset, a dinner reception under string lights, toasts, laughter, dancing. In every single frame, she looked happy. And in every single frame, I was nowhere. You see, I raised Emily alone. Her father passed when she was 9. I worked 2 jobs for years. I missed sleep, skipped vacations, wore coats 2 winters in a row so she could have piano lessons and college applications, and the life I believed she deserved. I wasn't perfect. Lord knows I wasn't. But I was there, or at least I thought I was. I waited for my phone to ring that evening. Surely she would call. Surely she would say, "Mom, I didn't know how to tell you," or "It all happened so fast." But the phone stayed silent as the sky darkened outside my kitchen window. I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit for years. My daughter had been drifting away long before that wedding day. I had just been pretending not to see it. Still, I never imagined she would erase me from the most important day of her life. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I walked slowly through the house I had bought for her. The little 2-bedroom cottage in Ashford that I had put in her name when she turned 25. I ran my fingers along the hallway wall, remembering the height marks we used to draw in pencil. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that both frightened and steadied me. If she no longer needed a mother, then, perhaps, she no longer needed what I had given her either. But I wasn't ready to act just yet. Not until I understood why my own daughter had decided I didn't belong at her wedding. The morning after I saw those wedding photos, I woke up feeling older than I had the night before. It wasn't the kind of tiredness sleep can fix. It was the kind that settles in your bones when something inside you shifts, when you realize a chapter of your life has closed and no one bothered to tell you. I made my coffee the way I always do. 2 scoops, a splash of cream. The ordinary rhythm of it steadied me. But as I stood by the sink, staring out at the maple tree in my backyard, I kept replaying the photos in my mind. Emily laughing beneath string lights. Emily holding another woman's arm, her mother-in-law's, the way she used to hold mine at church on Sundays. I picked up my phone 3 times that morning, meaning to call her. 3 times I set it back down. There's a strange kind of pride that grows in a woman who has survived loss, hardship, and years of sacrifice. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. But it stands up straight and says, "You deserve dignity." If Emily had wanted me there, she would have called. By noon, curiosity got the better of me. I opened her profile again and looked more carefully. The wedding had taken place nearly 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. She had been married for 14 days, while I sat here watering her hydrangeas and paying the property taxes on the cottage. The cottage. That little blue house on Willow Lane wasn't just a gift. It was my security too. I had purchased it 10 years ago with my retirement savings when the market was low. Emily had been struggling after graduate school, and I didn't want her starting married life drowning in rent payments. So I told her, live there as long as you like. Just build your future. I never imagined that future wouldn't include me. That afternoon, I drove by the cottage. I didn't knock. I didn't even get out of the car. I just sat across the street and looked at it. The front porch had new hanging plants. The mailbox now read Parker instead of Mitchell. I smiled faintly at that. She had changed her last name already. As I watched, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Emily stepped out, followed by her husband, Daniel, I remembered. And then another woman climbed out from the back seat. Tall, well-dressed, confident, her mother-in-law. They were laughing about something. Daniel opened the door for both women, and in that moment, I understood something painful but clear. Emily hadn't forgotten to invite me. She had chosen not to. Maybe she believed I would criticize the wedding. Maybe she thought I wouldn't approve of the speed. Maybe she was embarrassed by my small-town ways next to Daniel's polished family. I don't know. A mother's mind can invent 100 explanations to soften rejection. But the truth remained the same. She built her new life without me standing beside her. I drove home slowly, my hands steady on the wheel. I wasn't angry, not the way you might expect. Anger burns hot and fast. What I felt was colder, quieter. I spent that evening going through old paperwork, deeds, insurance policies, tax documents. Not out of spite, out of clarity. If my daughter wanted independence, I would give it to her fully. No strings, no silent support she didn't acknowledge. But before I made any decisions, I needed to hear her voice. And that call, when it finally came, would change everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and what children believe they are owed. When Emily finally called, her voice sounded light, almost cheerful, as if nothing had happened at all. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Sorry I've been so busy. Things have just been crazy." I held the phone a little tighter. "I can imagine," I replied softly. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't mention the wedding. Instead, she began talking about honeymoon plans, Napa for a few days, then maybe Italy next spring. She spoke quickly, like someone skimming over a chapter she didn't want to read aloud. I let her talk. Sometimes silence says more than confrontation ever could. Finally, I said gently, "I saw the photos." The line went quiet. I could almost hear her swallow. "Oh," she said. "Yeah, it was kind of last minute. Small, just family, just family." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I see." She rushed in to fill the space. Daniel's parents really wanted something intimate. And with everything going on, we didn't want drama. You know how weddings can get. Drama. I have been called many things in my 70 years. Strong, stubborn, protective, but never dramatic. I had spent my life smoothing over conflicts, not creating them. "Emily," I said carefully, "did you think I would cause trouble?" "No, Mom. It's not that," she replied quickly. "It's just, you and Daniel's mom are very different, and I didn't want tension." I almost laughed at that. I had met the woman twice. Both times I had complimented her earrings and asked about her garden. If that was tension, I must have missed it. What hurt wasn't the excuse. It was the realization that she had constructed a version of me in her mind, one that justified leaving me out. "I would have liked to be there," I said quietly, "even if I just sat in the back." Another pause. "Well, it all happened so fast," she said again. "Anyway, we'll have a bigger celebration later. Maybe next year, maybe." I knew what that meant. It meant I would receive a polite invitation month from now, like a distant aunt. I would sit at a decorated table, smile for photos, and pretend I hadn't missed the moment when my daughter promised her life to someone else. We spoke a few minutes more. She asked about the weather. I asked about Daniel's new job. It was civil, pleasant, even. Before hanging up, she added casually, "Oh, and Daniel's mom is helping us redo the cottage. We're thinking of knocking down the wall between the kitchen and living room. It'll open up the space." I felt something shift inside me. "Redo the cottage?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "It needs updating. Don't worry, we'll send you pictures." I looked around my quiet kitchen at the framed photo of Emily at age 5, missing her front tooth, and holding a crayon drawing she had made for me. She had made decisions about her wedding without me. Now she was making decisions about the house without asking. And that was when clarity, not anger, settled fully in my heart. "Emily," I said calmly, "we need to talk about the house." She laughed lightly. "About what?" "It's ours, Mom." I didn't correct her. Not yet. But that night, after we hung up, I pulled the deed from the folder in my desk drawer, and I read every line carefully, because what my daughter believed about that cottage and what was actually true were two very different things. That night, I sat at my dining table with the deed spread out in front of me, and for the first time in years, I read it not as a mother, but as a woman. You see, when I bought that little cottage on Willow Lane, I had been careful. Careful in a way only someone who has lost a husband too young learns to be. I had put the house in a living trust, with Emily as the beneficiary, not the owner. It was meant to protect her if anything ever happened to me. But it also meant one simple truth. The house was still legally mine. I remember the lawyer explaining it at the time. "This way," he had said, "you maintain control while ensuring her future." Back then, I never imagined I would need that control. I traced my fingers slowly along the signature at the bottom mine, written in steady ink. 10 years ago, I had signed that document with love in my heart and hope in my chest. It had never crossed my mind that one day I might need to protect myself from the very child I was trying to secure. The next morning, I made an appointment with the same attorney's office, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of clarity. When I walked in, the receptionist recognized me. "Mrs. Whittaker, it's been a while." "Yes," I said gently. "Life has a way of surprising us." I sat across from Mr. Langford, older now, thinner, but still sharp-eyed. I explained that I wanted to review the trust and discuss my options. He listened quietly. "Has something changed?" he asked. I hesitated. "How do you summarize heartbreak in a sentence?" "My daughter is married," I said finally, "and I'm not sure she understands that generosity isn't ownership." He nodded slowly, as if he had heard variations of that story before. We discussed possibilities, adjusting terms, setting boundaries, even selling the property if I chose. Everything was legal. Everything was within my rights. When I left his office, the air felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but steadier. On my drive home, I passed Willow Lane again. This time, there was a dumpster in the driveway. The front door was open. Through the window, I could see workers moving furniture. They had already started tearing down the wall. I pulled over and stepped out of my car. No one noticed me at first. The sound of drills and hammers filled the air. Then Emily walked out onto the porch, holding a clipboard. She looked confident, busy, like a homeowner overseeing renovations. She saw me and froze. "Mom," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" I looked at the dumpster, at the open wall, at the strangers carrying out the old oak cabinet I had installed with my own hands. "I might ask you the same thing," I replied calmly. She laughed nervously. "We're just updating things. It'll increase the value." Increase the value. I studied her face. the daughter I had once rocked through fevers, the teenager I had driven to debate tournaments, the young woman I had believed would always call me first. Emily, I said gently but firmly, did you ever think to ask me before making structural changes? Her expression shifted. Confusion, then mild irritation. Ask you, Mom, it's my house. There it was again. That assumption, that certainty. I took a slow breath, feeling something inside me settle into place, not bitterness, not rage, but resolve. No, I said quietly, it isn't. The noise of construction faded into the background as she stared at me, and in that moment, standing on that porch with dust floating in the afternoon sunlight, I knew this conversation would not just change the house. It would change our relationship forever. Emily stared at me as if I had just spoken in a language she didn't understand. What do you mean it isn't? She asked, her voice tightening. The workers inside kept hammering, unaware that the foundation shifting that afternoon wasn't made of wood and drywall. It was made of belief. I kept my tone calm. I had learned long ago that when emotions run high, the quietest voice often carries the most weight. The cottage is in a living trust, I explained. You are the beneficiary, Emily, not the owner. I never transferred the title into your name. Her face went pale. That's not possible. It is, I said gently. I did it to protect you, and to protect myself. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. So what you're saying you can just take it back? I looked past her into the living room, where the wall now stood half demolished. Pieces of drywall lay on the floor like broken promises. I'm saying, I replied, that major renovations should have been discussed with me. At that moment, Daniel stepped out from inside. He wiped dust from his hands and glanced between us. Is everything okay? Emily crossed her arms. Apparently not. Mom says this isn't our house. Daniel frowned slightly. But you gave it to her. I allowed her to live here, I corrected calmly. There's a difference. For a brief second, I saw something flicker across his face. Calculation, perhaps, or surprise. I couldn't tell. Emily's voice rose. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just put it in my name if it was truly mine? There it was, the word that stung more than anything. Truly, because, I said softly, I never imagined I would be excluded from my own daughter's wedding. And I never imagined renovations would begin without a single conversation. Her cheeks flushed. So this is about the wedding. You're punishing me, punishing. I shook my head slowly. No, sweetheart, I'm clarifying boundaries. Daniel stepped in, trying to smooth things over. Look, Mrs. Whittaker, we can pause construction. We just assumed. Yes, I interrupted gently. You assumed. Silence stretched between us. The workers had stopped now, sensing tension. Emily looked at me as though I had betrayed her, but the truth was, she had mistaken generosity for entitlement. I need you to stop the renovations, I said firmly. Effective immediately. Her eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am. The words didn't feel harsh. They felt necessary. You embarrassed me today, she whispered. I felt that sentence like a small knife. Emily, I said, my voice steady, but softer now, finding out about your wedding from strangers embarrassed me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, two women standing on opposite sides of pride and pain. Finally, I turned to leave. "Mom," she called after me, her voice trembling now, not angry but uncertain. "What are you going to do?" I paused at the edge of the driveway. "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "But I do know this: independence goes both ways." As I drove away, my hands didn't shake. My heart hurt, yes, but beneath that hurt was something solid. For the first time in years, I wasn't acting out of sacrifice. I was acting out of self-respect. And sometimes, those two things are very different. What I didn't yet know was how far Emily would go once she realized the house, and the security she believed was guaranteed might no longer be hers at all. That evening, my phone rang before I had even finished washing the dinner dishes. I knew it was her. A mother always knows. I dried my hands slowly and answered on the fourth ring. "Mom," Emily's voice came through tight and strained. "Daniel says we need to understand exactly what's going on." "Not I need to understand. Daniel says." "I already explained," I replied gently. "The house is in a trust. It remains under my control." There was muffled whispering on her end. Then Daniel's voice came on the line, polite, but firmer than before. "With respect, Mrs. Whittaker, we've already invested money into the renovations, contractors, materials. We assumed this was a permanent gift." I leaned back in my chair. "And you assumed correctly that you could live there. You assumed incorrectly that ownership had been transferred." Silence. Then Emily again, her voice cracking slightly. "Why are you doing this now? Why didn't you ever tell me?" I closed my eyes. "Because love doesn't expect to be questioned. Because trust feels safer when it isn't tested. Because I never thought I would need to say it out loud." "I didn't think it would matter," I answered honestly. "Until it did." There was a long pause. "Is this because I didn't invite you?" she asked, softer now. Not defensive, not sharp, just unsure. My heart squeezed at that. "It's because," I said carefully, "you made life-changing decisions without me twice. First, your wedding, then the house. Both times, I learned about them after the fact." She sniffled quietly. I hadn't heard her cry in years. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "Intent. Such a small word. Such a heavy consequence." "I believe you," I said, "but impact matters more than intent." Daniel cleared his throat. "What are you planning to do?" There it was, the practical question behind all the emotion. I had spent the afternoon thinking about that very thing. I had options. I could sell. I could restructure the trust. I could require formal rent. I could simply leave everything as it was and accept the silent distance growing between us. But something inside me had shifted. "I'm considering putting the house on the market," I said calmly. Emily gasped. "You can't. That's our home." The The word home lingered in the air. Home. I thought about the nights I had stayed up sewing Halloween costumes, the mornings I had packed lunches before sunrise, the sacrifices made quietly so she would never feel lack. A house becomes a home through presence, not paperwork. If you want it to be your home, I replied steadily, then we can discuss buying it. Fair market value, like adults. The line went completely silent. That wasn't the answer they expected. You'd make us buy it, she asked faintly. I would allow you the opportunity, I corrected gently. More whispering between them. I could hear the shift, not just financial calculation, but realization. The safety net they assumed would always stretch beneath them now had edges. Can we talk in person? Emily finally asked. Yes, I said. We should have done that from the beginning. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't crying. But I was grieving. Not the house, not even the wedding. I was grieving the illusion that love alone is enough to maintain closeness. Sometimes, boundaries are the only language adults truly understand, and the conversation we were about to have face to face would determine whether we were rebuilding a relationship or simply negotiating property. The next afternoon, Emily came alone. That told me more than anything she could have said. I watched her car pull into my driveway, slower than usual. She didn't rush out. She sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, gathering courage. When she finally stepped inside my house, she looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally, like the confident bride from the photographs, had been replaced by the little girl who once hid behind my skirt on her first day of kindergarten. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she used to do her homework, the same table where I had helped her fill out college applications. Life has a way of circling back to familiar places when something important needs to be said. I didn't tell Daniel to come, she began quietly. I noticed, I replied. She looked down at her hands. He's upset. His parents are upset. They think you're trying to control us. That word again, control. I folded my hands in front of me. And what do you think? She hesitated. For the first time since this began, she didn't answer quickly. I think, she swallowed. I think I didn't want you at the wedding because I was afraid. Afraid of me? I asked gently. Afraid of disappointing you, she whispered. That wasn't the answer I expected. She continued, her voice trembling now. Daniel's family is different. They're polished, organized. Everything looks perfect. When we decided to have a small ceremony, his mother immediately took over. She chose the venue, the flowers, the guest list. The guest list, I repeated softly. Emily nodded, tears forming. I told myself it would be easier not to include you. I thought if you were there, you'd see how little control I had. I didn't want you to see me small. Oh, my heart. All this time, I believed she had pushed me out because she didn't value me. And here she was, confessing she had hidden me because she feared my judgment. I have never wanted you to feel small, I said quietly. I know that now, she replied. But in the moment, it felt easier to pretend it was just intimate. And then the house, she shook her head. When his mom started talking about renovations, I didn't stop her. I liked the idea of finally having something that was fully mine. There it was, not entitlement. Insecurity. I wasn't trying to steal from you, she said quickly. I just wanted to feel established. I reached across the table, something I hadn't done since this began, and placed my hand over hers. Emily, I said gently, ownership doesn't make you established. Character does. She broke then, real tears, not frustrated ones. I'm sorry, she whispered. I was ashamed that I still needed your help, so I acted like I didn't. Ah, now we were finally speaking the truth. I squeezed her hand. Needing help is not weakness. Pretending you don't need it, that's what creates distance. She looked up at me. Are you really going to sell the house? I held her gaze for a long moment. That depends, I said softly, on whether we're rebuilding trust or just negotiating square footage. For the first time since I saw those wedding photos, I saw fear in her eyes, not of losing property, but of losing me. And that, more than anything, told me this story wasn't over yet. I didn't answer her question right away. At my age, I've learned that the most important decisions should never be made in the heat of hurt, or even in the warmth of reconciliation. They should be made in stillness. Emily sat across from me, eyes red, waiting, not like a bride defending her choices, not like a homeowner protecting her investment, but like a daughter who suddenly understood she had gambled something far more valuable than property. I'm not interested in selling out of anger, I said finally. And I'm not interested in holding power over you either. She nodded slowly. But I am interested in respect, I continued. And respect goes both ways. The kitchen clock ticked softly behind us. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, ordinary sounds, anchoring an extraordinary moment. I was proud to help you, I said. Buying that cottage wasn't a burden. It was love. But love isn't meant to be hidden when it becomes inconvenient. She wiped her cheeks. I didn't mean to hide you. I know, I replied gently, but that's what happened. For a moment, we sat in silence, not the cold silence from before, but something softer, reflective. Here's what I propose, I said at last. The renovations stop until we put everything in writing. If you and Daniel want to own the cottage outright, we'll have it appraised. You can purchase it over time, properly, transparently. I'll even offer generous terms. Her eyes widened slightly. You'd still help us. I would help you build something honest, I corrected, not something assumed. She nodded, absorbing that. And if you decide you're not ready, I continued, then we restructure the trust with clear expectations. Either way, there will be no more confusion. She reached across the table again, this time holding my hands tightly. I don't want to lose you over this, she whispered. You won't, I said softly, not if we both choose maturity over pride. The truth is, I could have sold the house. I could have walked away quietly and let her feel the consequences fully. There would have been a certain poetic justice in that, but justice without grace often leaves more scars than lessons. A week later, we met with the attorney together, Emily, Daniel, and me. Papers were reviewed. Numbers were discussed. No voices were raised. No accusations were thrown. It wasn't dramatic. It was adult. And that, in many ways, was the greater victory. Emily apologized again, not just for the wedding, but for underestimating me, for assuming my love came without boundaries, for mistaking generosity as permanent entitlement. And I apologized too, for not communicating more clearly, for assuming she understood what was never explicitly said. We didn't rewrite the past. The wedding photos still exist. I still wasn't there, but we rewrote the future. The cottage remains in the trust for now. They'll purchase it when they're ready, and when they do, it will be earned, not inherited through silence. As for me, I sleep peacefully again. Because here is what I have learned, sitting at this same oak table so many years later. Children grow up believing independence means distance. Parents grow older learning that love must sometimes include limits. And when both sides finally understand that not as opponents, but as equals, that's when a family truly becomes strong. I didn't lose my daughter. I simply stopped disappearing to keep her comfortable. And sometimes that is the bravest thing a mother can do. For a while after everything settled, I kept thinking about the wedding. Not with bitterness anymore, but with a quiet ache, like an old scar that tingles when the weather changes. Life moved forward. The contractors returned, but this time with permits approved and signatures in place. Daniel was more measured now. He greeted me respectfully whenever I visited. Emily called more often, sometimes about practical matters, sometimes just to ask how I was feeling. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. One Sunday afternoon, about 2 months later, Emily invited me over for dinner at the cottage. I almost said no out of habit, out of that lingering instinct to protect myself, but healing doesn't grow in avoidance. So I went. The house looked different. The wall between the kitchen and living room was gone, replaced by a wide, open space filled with warm light. The old oak cabinet had been refinished instead of discarded, a detail I hadn't expected. I couldn't let them throw it out, Emily said when she saw me looking at it. You built that with Grandpa. I nodded, touched more deeply than I let on. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, slightly lumpy, just the way I used to make them. We sat at a new dining table, but the conversation felt less rehearsed than before. Halfway through the meal, Emily grew quiet. There's something else, she said. My heart skipped, just slightly. She reached for her phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a photograph, one I hadn't seen before. It was from her wedding day, not the professional shots posted online, not the polished vineyard portraits. This one was candid. She was standing alone before the ceremony, bouquet in hand, eyes red as if she had been crying. "Daniel took that," she said softly. "I was thinking about you." I swallowed carefully. "I almost called," she continued, "right before I walked down the aisle. I almost told them to wait." "But you didn't," I said gently. She shook her head. "I was scared. I thought if I invited you last minute, you'd say no, or worse, that you'd see through me." "See through what?" "That I wasn't as strong as I pretend to be." "Oh, my sweet girl." I reached across the table and held her hand. "Strength isn't proven by excluding the people who love you," I said. "It's proven by standing beside them, even when you feel uncertain." Tears welled in her eyes again, but these were softer tears. Not defensive, not ashamed. Would you help me plan a small ceremony here?" she asked hesitantly. "Not a redo, just something with you present, a blessing, a dinner, something real." The request surprised me, not because it was grand, it wasn't, but because it was vulnerable. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. A month later, we gathered in the backyard of that little blue cottage. No vineyard, no string lights stretching for miles, just close friends, a few neighbors, and me. Emily wore a simple cream dress. Daniel stood beside her. And this time, when vows were spoken again, quieter, more grounded, I stood in the front row. Not hidden, not edited out. Present. As I watched them exchange promises for the second time, I realized something important. Sometimes our children don't reject us because they don't love us. Sometimes they step away because they are still learning who they are, and they fear our reflection might expose their doubts. But love that survives truth becomes stronger. And as I drove home that evening, the sky painted in soft pink and gold, I felt no desire to sell the house, no need to reclaim anything, because respect had returned, and with it, so had my daughter. Even now, when I think about that season of my life, I don't remember it as the time my daughter excluded me. I remember it as the time we both finally grew up. A few weeks after the backyard blessing, Emily came over one evening with a small envelope in her hand. She looked nervous, the way she used to before showing me a report card she wasn't sure I'd approve of. "What's that?" I asked, setting aside my knitting. She handed it to me without speaking. Inside was a check, not large enough to buy the cottage outright, not even close, but it wasn't meant to be. "It's the first payment," she said quietly, "toward the house. We talked about it, and we want to do this the right way. No assumptions, no shortcuts." I looked up at her. "You don't have to rush," I reminded her. "I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she said. "That's the point." There was a steadiness in her voice I hadn't heard before, not the borrowed confidence of someone leaning on their spouse or their in-laws. This was her own. We arranged a simple written agreement. Monthly payments they could manage comfortably. No pressure, no resentment, just clarity. And something unexpected happened after that. The tension disappeared. When help is clearly defined, it stops feeling like control. When responsibility is shared, pride softens into partnership. Daniel began calling me directly about small things, insurance questions, repair advice, not because he had to, but because he wanted to include me. His tone shifted too, less guarded, more respectful. And Emily, she started coming by without agenda, sometimes just to sit, sometimes to cook together. Once, she even brought over her wedding album and asked me which photos I liked best. There was no bitterness in me anymore, only understanding. You see, when children step into marriage, they don't just join another family. They begin the complicated task of balancing identities. They want to prove they are independent. They want to belong somewhere new. And sometimes, in that scramble to establish themselves, they push away the very roots that gave them strength. But roots don't chase branches. They stay grounded. Months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon, Emily stood in my kitchen again, this time with news. "I'm pregnant," she said, her hand resting gently on her stomach. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then I did what mothers and grandmothers have done for generations. I pulled her into my arms. In that embrace, all the misunderstandings of the past year seemed smaller, not erased, but softened, because now she was about to learn something for herself. She was about to understand that loving a child means giving without guarantee, protecting without ownership, and setting boundaries not to control, but to preserve dignity. As I sit here now, telling you this story, the cottage still stands on Willow Lane. The payments continue steadily. No one rushes. No one assumes. And my daughter calls me every Sunday evening without fail. If there is one lesson I carry from all of this, it's this: love does not mean disappearing, so others feel comfortable. And independence does not require forgetting who held your hand when you were small. When we stopped confusing generosity with obligation, we found respect. And respect, my dear, is the foundation that holds a family upright. Long after weddings, houses, and pride have faded into memory, this is the final part of our story. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether to speak up or stay silent for the sake of peace, remember this old woman's truth. Peace built on silence rarely lasts, but peace built on honesty can hold for generations. I thought our story had settled into its gentle ending. Payments made on time, Sunday calls without fail, the steady rhythm of reconciliation. But life, as it often does, had one more lesson waiting for us. It came the night Emily went into labor. Daniel called me just after midnight, his voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. "Mom," he said, and that word caught my attention immediately. "We're at the hospital. It's happening." "Not Mrs. Whittaker." "Mom." I drove through the quiet streets with my hands steady on the wheel, remembering another midnight drive decades ago when I had been the one breathing through pain, terrified and hopeful all at once. When I reached the hospital, Emily was already in the delivery room. Daniel met me in the hallway, eyes wide, hair slightly disheveled. "She keeps asking for you," he said, and in that moment, every old hurt, every wedding photo, every misunderstanding felt distant. When I walked into that room, Emily reached for me immediately. No hesitation, no pride. "Mom," she whispered, her face pale but determined. "Stay." I stayed. I held her hand the way I had when she was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. I wiped her forehead. I reminded her to breathe. I told her she was stronger than she believed. Hours later, when that tiny cry finally filled the room, something shifted in her eyes. They changed. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was someone's mother. The nurse placed that little bundle into her arms, and Emily stared down with awe and fear, and love so fierce it almost hurt to witness. Then she looked up at me. "I didn't understand," she whispered. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. She didn't understand how deep love runs, how easily it bruises, how fiercely it protects, how boundaries are not barriers, but safeguards for something sacred. "I get it now," she said softly, "why you did what you did." I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You don't have to get it perfectly. You just have to try." When she handed me my granddaughter for the first time, I felt the circle close in a way words can't fully explain. This child will grow. She will test limits. She will crave independence. One day, she may even misunderstand her mother. And when that day comes, I hope Emily remembers this season of her life, not as the time her mother almost sold the house, but as the time she learned that love without respect weakens, and love with boundaries strengthens. A few weeks later, when we gathered at the cottage again, now filled with baby blankets and soft lullabies, Emily placed a small framed photograph on the mantel. It was from the backyard blessing. Me standing beside her and Daniel, hands clasped together. Not edited, not excluded, included. She caught me looking at it and smiled. "You belong here," she said, and I realized something simple but profound. Sometimes children drift, not because they want to leave, but because they need to find their way back on their own. If I had reacted in anger, if I had disappeared in silence, we might have lost each other entirely. Instead, we chose honesty, and honesty gave us another generation. So, if you're listening to this by your own quiet kitchen window, wondering whether it's too late to speak up, it isn't. Speak gently, stand firmly, love deeply, and trust that respect, once planted, can bloom long after hurt has faded. Now, truly, this is where our story rests. Write part 12. Additionally, if it's the requirement of the structure of the story, I am okay with that, even if you write more than 12 parts. But if you are just following my instructions and dragging the story unnecessarily, there is no need for that. And I have instructed for this clearly before the story. You're absolutely right to clarify that. And no, I'm not dragging this just to follow a number. The emotional arc has already resolved. What remains is not conflict, but reflection. So this will be the true closing, not filler, not extension for length, but a gentle settling of everything we've lived through together. There's something no one tells you about growing older. It isn't the wrinkles. It isn't the quiet house. It isn't even the aches in your knees when the weather changes. It's the realization that your children will one day misunderstand you, not because you failed them, but because they are still learning who they are. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, I sometimes watch the sun dip behind the trees and think about that afternoon when I first saw the wedding photos. I remember the sting, the disbelief, the way my teacup trembled in my hands. Back then, it felt like rejection. Today, it feels like a turning point. Emily and Daniel are slowly paying off the cottage, not because I demanded it, but because they want to stand on their own feet. The payments are steady. The conversations are open. There's no tension behind them anymore. And every Sunday, without fail, my phone rings. Sometimes it's about the baby's first smile. Sometimes it's about a recipe that didn't turn out quite right. Sometimes it's nothing important at all. And that's how I know we're okay, because distance doesn't measure itself in miles or property. It measures itself in silence. And we are no longer silent. Last week, Emily asked me something unexpected. "Mom," she said, rocking the baby in her arms, "were you ever afraid you'd lose me?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Yes," I said honestly, "but I was more afraid of losing myself trying to keep you." She went quiet at that. That is the truth so many parents are afraid to say out loud. We bend, we sacrifice, we swallow hurt, we disappear in small ways to keep peace. But when we disappear too much, our children don't learn how to respect us. They learn how to overlook us. And that isn't love. Love is honest. Love is patient. Love is willing to risk discomfort to protect dignity. If I had stayed silent about the house, if I had pretended the wedding didn't wound me, Emily might have continued building a life where I stood politely at the edges. Instead, we rebuilt something stronger. Not dependence, not control, but mutual respect. One day, my granddaughter will grow up and test her mother's boundaries. And when that day comes, I hope Emily remembers what this season taught her, that boundaries aren't punishments. They are invitations. Invitations to grow. Invitations to communicate. Invitations to stay connected without disappearing. As for me, I no longer measure my worth by how needed I am. I measure it by how honestly I live. And if there is one quiet piece of wisdom, I would leave you with sitting here, older, softer, but steadier than I was before. It is this: you can love your children fiercely without surrendering your self-respect. You can forgive without pretending nothing hurt. And you can stand firm without losing your warmth. That is the balance we found. That is the lesson the little blue cottage taught us. And that, my dear, is where this story truly ends. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.